Last summer, I made a video where I attempted to go 24 hours without grid power in the middle of a terrible heat wave with temperatures around 110 degrees. The test went decently well, proving I could survive such a thing, even if it did require some sacrifice, and I promised to return to do a similar test during the cold of the winter. The problem is, much like I stated before, summer weather in Texas is really predictable. Winter weather is not. It's not unusual to see Texans walking around in shorts and a t-shirt during the middle of winter. In fact, I was out washing my Smurfy car just yesterday because it was a nice sunny 70 degrees outside. However, looking at the forecast, it looked like Monday or Tuesday would have to be the day.
So in addition to the light wintry precip, we are talking about bitterly cold temperatures near record lows.
So many people right now are the road conditions, and can the power grid hold up?
Also, every line in the grocery store is backed up down the aisles to the center of the store. And I really wasn't ready to make this video as I was still trying to finalize some things on my solar setup, and I was also in the middle of doing a documentary on the 6502 microprocessor, which I think you're going to like. But this could be the only cold snap that we have this winter, and I wanted to take advantage of it. So everything else had to go on hold. The first thing I need to do is talk a bit about some of the upgrades I did over the last few months. EcoFlow sent me this new Delta Pro Ultra, just kind of out of the blue actually. I didn't even ask for it, but after I got a look at how it all works, I really couldn't complain. The Ultra is similar to the Delta Pros I already have, but far more powerful and also more modular. One thing I love is that a single inverter has regular 120 volt outputs and a 240 volt output without needing to pair another system. Now, if you want to pair them, you can by the use of this hub. However, all you'll be doing here is increasing your amps, not your volts, giving you a 50 amp output. Now, one interesting thing is they did add wall mounts to this hub and used right angle connectors, and they actually told me this was in direct response to my criticism of the previous hub's design. So I'm impressed, as this is much more elegant. So what they actually sent me was an inverter and a battery to go with it, and then another inverter and a battery to go with that one, and then a smart panel. And I'll come back to the smart panel in a bit. Both inverters together would be able to make enough power to run the entire house, but I really didn't have enough battery capacity or solar generation to be worth it. So I did the math and realized I don't really need the second inverter, so it made more sense just to put both batteries on a single inverter. By the way, as a sheer coincidence, I happen to have a spare inverter for sale if somebody in the Dallas area would like to have one at a great price. So I set up the new system temporarily inside of my network closet where I always have had my solar stuff, just to see how it works. And I need to explain a bit about my panel arrangement. I've even seen comments from people wondering why I have 9 panels on my roof instead of a nice even number like 10, which would look nicer. Well, it has to do with voltages. My previous system could only handle a max of 150 volts. And each of my panels is almost exactly 50 volts. So what I did was I put them in groups of 3 like this so that each section was producing 150 volts. And this was the best way to divide this up. So I actually ran 3 separate pairs of wires down into the house, as you've probably seen before, and then joined them together in parallel so that they had 3 times the amps, but kept it at a nice 150 volts. And this arrangement worked perfectly fine. However, since the new Delta Pro Ultra supports 450 volts, I thought, hey, let's go ahead and connect all these in series for a full 450 volts. That should make it more efficient. And it actually did work for a day or two. I was really impressed at some of the power I was generating at the peak of the day, which was a little over 3,000 watts. And that's great because my previous system maxed out around 2,400 watts, so this is just power my panels were already capable of, but I just couldn't take advantage of. Unfortunately, one day it turned a bit cold, which can cause the solar panels to produce higher voltage, and my panels just went up about 1 volt each and pushed me to that 453 volts, and that caused the unit to shut off and generate an error for over voltage. However, all isn't lost. One great thing about this unit is that it has 2 different solar inputs. One is a high voltage here on the side, and then here on the front, it also has a low voltage input. So I just split the panels up a bit so that one group was on the low voltage input. And this has been working fine ever since. EcoFlow also sent out a team of electricians from a local company called EPX to install the smart panel. Then after I talked with them, we decided the best option would be to install the smart panel in the garage next to the main breaker box. The smart panel can be surface mounted or recessed, and I opted to go with the recessed option. Ironically, most of the house was without power for a few hours during the setup, and thankfully my studio was able to operate independently on solar power during that time. Of course, putting the system in the garage means that I needed to move the inverter and batteries to the garage as well. That also meant I needed to remove all of these solar wires from my network closet and run new wires to the garage from the panels. A few days later, I needed to do the final connections, but I had just cut my finger up pretty badly on a knife while washing dishes, so my friend Oliver came over to terminate the connections for me, and here we go. The system is all set up and seems to be working. Now I have to talk about the smart panel. So when I first got it, I thought I understood how it worked, and I thought it was similar to a transfer switch. That turned out to be wrong. But even after I got it all set up and working and everything, I thought I knew how it worked then, and it turned out I still didn't fully understand how it worked. But I think I got a pretty good grasp on it now. So let me see if I can explain it. So the box essentially connects to your main breaker box like any sub panel would. It feeds off of a large 240 volt breaker like so. And then you would move some of your circuits from the main panel over to the smart panel, like so. And then of course you plug the panel into the Delta Pro Ultra, like so, and they have these neat little locking mechanisms too. Okay, so once all set up, it can power all of the circuits connected to it either from the grid, from a generator, or from your solar system. Also, it can pull power from the grid to charge your batteries if you want it to. In fact, that's what mine is doing now. As you can see on my app screenshot here, it says Storm Guard, and that's because I have it configured to keep the batteries at 100% in the event of an approaching storm, even if it has to pull that power from the grid. So one of the misconceptions that I had was I thought each individual circuit could be selected as to whether it was solar or grid power. However, that's not the case. As it turns out, all 12 circuits have to be powered by the same thing, whatever the current power input is. So when installing the panel, they asked me to pick 12 circuits to be on the smart panel. So I picked the living room, the main 2 bedrooms, and the bathrooms, and the garage. And then I also took 2 circuits to make a 240 volt circuit to go to the sub panel that is in the new addition of my house that we built like 12 years ago. And that's where the old transfer switch and stuff was. I also picked our outdoor EV charger since I thought it would be cool to be able to charge a car during a power outage. The last 2 circuits are the refrigerator and the lights and sockets around the kitchen sink. And so, on the app, you can see all of the different circuits and how much power is being used on each one. You can even click a specific circuit and see its historical use over the day, or even the week, month, or year. But more importantly, besides just being a great backup system, it can also allow you to better use the power from your solar panels to save you money on your electric bill. For example, you can set a certain threshold. In my case, I have it set to 50%. So that as long as the battery is above 50%, then it will power the 12 circuits from solar. And when it drops below 50%, it will return to grid power. You can also look at your historical solar generation and see exactly how much money you're saving each day. And even if you don't have solar panels, but you have a power plan where the rate is, say, cheaper at night than it is during the day, then you can actually have it charge up during the night when power is cheap, and then use that power during the day in order to save you money on your electric bill. But enough details. Let's see if we can put theory into practice and have a real power outage test. Okay, so the day has come. It's 6 o'clock in the morning, and I picked this time because it's the time I lost power back during the big storm a few years ago. It's 15 degrees outside and windy, but on the bright side, it looks like we aren't going to get any snow or ice. I went into the garage and turned off the power, and well, it didn't work. Okay, so here's what I think happened. So there was an error on the unit from the night before. It's not a big deal. It's a little bug. I've been talking to EcoFlow about it. But it looks like the unit will not switch power sources on its own until that error has been cleared. So I cleared the error, and let's try again. This time there wasn't even so much as a flicker. So at this point, most of the house should have power, except for the major appliances. And it looks like I'm using about 456 watts, just powering the various little things around the house, and most of the lights are off. And when you look at each room pulling a few watts here and there, mostly for power bricks and charging phones and tablets and stuff like that, it's amazing how much it adds up to. I wanted to go back to bed for another hour or two, but I did go ahead and turn on one space heater just on low, just to get some heat being generated. That pushed me up to 1,100 watts already. Hopefully when the sun comes out, I can spare more power. Okay, so it's 10 o'clock now, and things are not looking great. Not only is it overcast, but it is very overcast. Imagine the darkest overcast you've ever seen outside of a thunderstorm, and this is what we have today, which is not good because, as you can see, all of my panels on the house are only producing 178 watts, which is almost an insignificant amount of power. Time to go power up the studio building. I'll start by opening the blinds to let some light in. Now let's switch over to battery power. Okay, and we're starting from 100% on both units. I also keep a little thermometer in here, and we're down to 59 degrees, so it's down about 16 degrees over the 4 hours the power has been off. Okay, so today it looks like I may actually be dealing with that worst case scenario. And I mean, keep in mind, I've always known that this could happen, that there could be a day where there's just no sunlight. Don't don't worry, I do have some contingencies for that. We'll deal with that in a moment. But one of the things I have to do is I kind of have to decide what my strategy is going to be for today. So, you know, if you knew how long the power was going to be out, like if it was just going to be a few hours, for example, well, in that case, I could live in pretty good comfort. I would just run everything at full blast off on battery power and just not worry about it. But the goal here is I got to try to make it 24 hours. So I'm going to have to ration out the battery power throughout the day and figure out other ways to generate some heat. So let's see what we can do. I've decided to connect up a small 500-watt space heater, and then I'm just going to close the door to the studio office and try to just heat that one room. I'll let the rest of the building get cold. So looking at the numbers here, you can see I'm using 581 watts, producing 0 from solar, and it's saying I've got 6 hours left. But the other unit really isn't doing much, so worst case I can swap the space heater over to a plug on the other phase and run it for another 6 hours. So I have 12 hours of heat in the studio unless the sun comes out. Back in the house now, I bought these emergency candles a few years ago after the storm, and they say they'll last 36 hours, but call me skeptical. With all 3 wicks lit, they should last 12 hours, but I have a dozen of these, so let's give it a try. With all 3 wicks, I understand this should put out the equivalent of around 250 watts of heat. But where the real heat's going to come from is this kerosene heater I bought a while back. It's still brand new, never been used. I was hoping I wouldn't need to use this today. I've never used one of these before, so I guess I'll start by reading the instructions. I also sliced my thumb up on a sharp edge, and here I was worried about suffocating. Anyway, I figured out how to use the little fuel pump to fill up the tank, and I guess I didn't buy enough fuel because I only had one of these containers, and it only filled it about halfway. Okay, after watching a few YouTube videos on the topic, I felt confident enough to light the thing and see what happens. And after a few minutes, it seemed to be working well. You can see it's quite hot here on the top. I'm also going to be monitoring the air quality meter since I don't know for sure what I'm doing. By the way, since it is very hot on the top, I decided to warm up some of my wife's chicken chili that she made last night. This actually worked out pretty well. I was planning to break out this camping stove, but now I'm not sure I need it. Oh, and the air monitor is showing fairly safe levels of carbon monoxide here on the kitchen counter. I understand we want to keep it below 50 parts per million, but if I move it right above the heater where the hot gases are venting out, you can see quite concerning levels going even a bit of over 300 ppm. I've tried adjusting the wick, but this seems to be about the best I can do, so I'll just continue to monitor from a few feet away. Okay, so it is 1 o'clock in the afternoon, so I've been without power for 7 hours, and it is still bitterly cold outside. But let's just take a look at things from a standpoint of status. It's still very cloudy outside, although I am actually producing now around 360 watts from the panels on the house. It's not much, but I'll take whatever I can get. The battery has fallen to 66%. In the kitchen area, I'm still hovering around 66 degrees, which isn't great, but is tolerable. Air quality still fine. The emergency candle in my office room is completely liquid now and has been burning for about 3 hours. It does surprisingly appear to have quite a lot of life left in it. And it is currently 63 degrees in my office, and on the other side of the house, the bathroom is at 50 degrees, and I have made no attempt to heat that area of the house at all. In my studio office, running that one 500-watt space heater, I'm still hovering around 63 degrees in there. Obviously, I have more powerful heaters, but I'm trying to use as little power as possible here. As for the batteries in the studio, I'm down to 2 hours remaining on the left unit, but notice I'm actually producing 118 watts of solar. Again, not much, but I'll take it. Shortly, I'll need to move the heater to a different outlet so I can use some of the power on this phase. As for the rest of Texas, we're hovering pretty close to the limit, but it looks like they won't be shedding any loads unless they have some unexpected breakdowns. And as cold as it is right now, it was still 18 degrees colder than this a few years ago when we had the statewide power outage. So at the moment, I'm only producing about 10% of the power that I would normally be producing on a day where the sun's out. So had the sun been out today, this part of the test would have been a breeze, honestly, at least until the sun went down, because I would have been making, 3, 4 thousand watts, and I would have been able to power several space heaters and all that kind of stuff. Now, on one hand, the batteries have been very nice because I have at least had electricity to my internet setup, my router, my Wi-Fi, my security cameras, my computers, phones, and even lights. I'm trying to keep lights off that I'm not using. I'm trying to be very conservative with it. But to be honest, I have power for all the normal stuff in the house except for heat. But now I have some bad news, and I did not catch this on camera, but I don't know what was happening, but I've been walking past that air quality meter like every 5 or 10 minutes and just kind of staring at it because I'll be honest, I don't know much about kerosene heaters. And so I know that there's dangers with carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, and so I've been watching the numbers, and they were hovering, very safe levels most of the day. But then all of a sudden I walked past, and holy cow, the carbon monoxide reading was like over 500. And I'm like, holy cow, that is not good. So I basically shut the heater off, opened the doors for a moment, let some fresh air in, saw the numbers go back down to about 12, where they're supposed to be. And, it's probably something to do with the wick height. I probably don't have it set right so that I'm getting incomplete combustion or something like that. But I can't figure out how to make it right. And I'm too scared, to be honest, to screw with it anymore. So my wife and I decided we would just turn it off. So what are we going to do now? Well, we need some sort of heat, so we broke out the camping stove. I've actually never used one of these either, but it doesn't have any adjustments on it, so it seems relatively idiot-proof, which is what I need. We also lit a bunch more of the candles. I mean, I know these will create carbon dioxide, and we'll continue to monitor, but I don't think we'll see the drastic numbers we saw with the heater. My wife also wanted to cook some more of her leftovers, but didn't want to put one of her good pots over a flame for some reason, so she made this bowl out of foil. And it seemed to work. Here it is boiling a few minutes later. Myself, I borrowed this old pot from my mom next door and wanted to see if I could scramble some eggs. I've never done this before, but it has to be better than when I tried to fry an egg on the sidewalk a few years ago, or when Lister and the cat tried to cook one with a bicycle-powered hairdryer. And sure enough, after a few minutes, I could tell it was cooking. It was just much slower than I was used to. And I'm going to add in some shredded ham and cheese. I think that's going to be great. Now, just some seasoning, and there we go. Okay, it is now 6 o'clock in the evening, and I've gone 12 hours without grid power, and I'm going to end this experiment here. So let's take a look at where things are. It's still 17 degrees outside. In the kitchen, where I've been running these emergency candles for the last 5 hours, the air quality is still fine, and the temperature has just dropped to 64.4 degrees. That's just 1 degree lower than where it was with the kerosene heater. Over on the kitchen table, my 2 camping heat cylinders are still going. They advertise 4 hours, but it's been 5 hours, so that's great. The candles have also been going for 5 hours, except for this one, which has been going for 8 hours, but as you can see, one of the wicks has fallen over, so it isn't producing as much heat as it could. And if you're wondering if these sources of heat have been helping, you need look no further than the other side of the house in the bathroom, where my temperature logger is showing 47 degrees, and in the garage we're down to 45 degrees. The main battery in the house is down to 30% and still shows about 2 hours runtime. It would be more than that, but my wife has been in her back sewing room pretty much going to town with full lights, sewing machine, and a space heater running. So, going out to the studio building for a moment, the power just went out, and you can hear my little desktop battery backup beeping, and that's what the computer's running on now. It's still 66 degrees in this room, which we managed to maintain with a small heater for nearly 12 hours, but it is quite cold in the rest of the building. Speaking of, let's have a look at the status of the EcoFlow system. As you can see, down to 0 on the left and 12% on the right. So, I'm going to go ahead and turn the power back on in the house. Okay, so let's talk about a few statistics first. This is the battery usage for the house today. As you can see, we pulled 10.7 kilowatt hours of juice just to keep the lights and electronics running for the most part. This was the pitiful solar production for the day, a measly 2.41 kilowatt hours. And here's the solar production for the entire week, and you can see how Sunday compared to pretty much every other day. Don't worry about last Monday. I don't even think I had the panels plugged in on that day. And here's an interesting tidbit. It started snowing immediately after I stopped the test, and the next morning it looked like this. You can see Amazon's been here. I guess the snow doesn't bother them. Anyway, what's more interesting is that the panels were completely covered in snow, and it's still overcast out. However, I was actually generating 413 watts, which is twice as much as I was getting most of the previous day, and that's despite the snow. I mean, it was just that dark the previous day. Okay, let's talk about the logs for a moment. This is the garage, and there's not much to tell. The moment I move the unit to the garage, you can see how sharply the temperature fell. The bathroom is interesting, and by the way, these charts are not to scale to each other, which is annoying, but we'll come back to that. There was no heat in there during the whole 12 hours, but for some reason the temperature fell really fast in the first 20 minutes or so and then slowed down, and I have no explanation for this dip here either. My office room was more like I'd expect, as there was no heat in there either, except for a single emergency candle that I started up in the morning. But one interesting tidbit is, at this spot right here, this is where I decided to move the candle out of the room and put it in with the others in the dining room, and then I closed the door to that room as well. Okay, now let's talk about the living room. Really, this includes the kitchen and dining room, as it's all one big open area in the house. So this section here, I was running the electric space heater on battery on a low setting of 700 watts. And here's where I shut that off and turned on the kerosene heater. After a brief period with no heat, this is where I started the candles and the camping stoves. So not only did those keep it from getting colder, but actually raised the temperature a bit. And now let's look at all of these to the same scale. So, what are my final thoughts on this? Well, I'd like to reiterate that this was a worst case scenario where we had freezing temperatures, virtually no sunlight, and no grid power. Had it been warmer, this would have been no problem. Had there been sunlight, I think there would have been no problem. And obviously with grid power, no problem. I'd also just like to reiterate that had this been a shorter period of time without power, like, 4 hours or something, we'd have been totally fine. We would have run the heaters at full blast on battery power and, we'd have been pretty comfortable, no problem. I'd also like to mention that had this been like a rolling blackout type situation, that would have also been no problem. I mean, it'd be easy to go for like an hour here or there without power from the grid, and we could just recharge from the grid when the power came back. I think the most interesting takeaway from this whole experiment is the fact that the thing that saved the day was these things. And I actually had very low expectations for both of these. So it actually turns out that the candles make more light and a little bit less heat. And these make more heat and a little bit less light. But I think what I'm actually going to do is get rid of the kerosene heater. And I'm just going to stockpile maybe a dozen or two of these canned heats. And I've even purchased, I haven't got it yet, but I purchased like a little heater mechanism you can sit on top of one of these cans that helps disperse the heat a little bit more evenly without having an open flame. I also want to talk about another thing that I could have done but didn't, and that is I could have, instead of trying to keep the bulk of the living area heated, I could have just retreated back to like 1, maybe 2 rooms and just concentrated all of my energy sources on keeping those 1 or 2 rooms warm. That's essentially what I did in this building here, and it worked for the most part. I was able to keep this building, or at least this room, warm for about 12 hours using nothing but a tiny little space heater because I blocked off all the rest of the building. In fact, I bet had I supplemented the heat in here a little bit with one of these, it would have been even warmer. Okay, so I've got an update for you. It's been about a week since I filmed the big test, and it took a few days to edit the video, but I also wanted to perform an experiment. You see, I've been kind of wondering if this product I was relying on for the air quality is maybe not the most reliable thing in the world. So I actually ordered not 1, but 2 different carbon monoxide, dedicated carbon monoxide meters, and I wanted to see if they would agree with this guy. And here's what I found. So I created an open flame and just held both meters sort of right into the path of the gases, and one of the things you'll immediately see is that the meter I've been using is registering 3 times the amount that the dedicated meter is doing. So I thought, you know what, let's see if we can create even more carbon monoxide. And the only way I really knew to do that was to kind of choke the flame and starve it of oxygen. And sure enough, in this experiment, you can see that the 1 meter is actually registering literally like 30 to 40 times the amount of carbon monoxide as the dedicated handheld meter. So this leads me to believe that having relied on this, I got some very bad information, and while the levels were rising in my house during the kerosene heater test, they probably weren't nearly as bad as what I was led to believe. Instead of being in the 500s, the carbon monoxide level was probably more like 20 parts per million, which would have been still in the relatively safe zone. I mean, you're going to have carbon monoxide in a confined space, and considering it was an emergency circumstance, I don't think that 20 parts per million would have been the end of the world. So anyway, yeah, the reason why this is probably not terribly accurate is, well, I read a long article about this exact product, and the guy basically explained that it doesn't have a dedicated detector for carbon monoxide. It does have some other detectors, and what it tries to do is it tries to estimate the amount of carbon monoxide based on calculations from some of these other things that it can detect, and it's not a terribly accurate way of doing it. So I think a dedicated carbon monoxide detector is definitely the way to go if that's something that you're worried about. So also, I did buy that little heating contraption, and I've already tested it, and it does work actually pretty well for distributing the heat in a more safe manner. And then the last thing I need to mention, by the way, is that I actually do have a coupon code from EcoFlow. So if you are tempted to buy any EcoFlow stuff, I ask that you use my code. That not only lets them know how many people have watched my video on the topic, but I might actually get a little bit of something in return. We'll see. Anyway, that's it for this episode. As always, thanks for watching.